episode 416 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics, usually of the retro variety. And I am your host today, Zach Wilkerson, and today we are here to talk about Persona 3. Persona 3 Reload, I think, for all three of us who are here. But before we get into things, let's introduce the three of us, starting with you, Aleks Franiczek.
Hello.
And making her triumphant return again to Retro Encounter, Alana Hagues.
When does it become less triumphant? Like, at what point?
At what point is it less triumphant? I think it's triumphant every time.
Oh, God.
If you think I'm not going to say that every time I host when you're on, you're wrong. It's always triumphant. I'm excited to chat about this game with the two of you because before we even get into things, I get the feeling that I am by far the least experienced Persona 3 player on this podcast. My first rodeo with it was Persona 3 Reload. But I know both of you have played it before. So let's kind of back up for a second before we dig into things and talk about our history with the series, specifically Persona 3, but also just our history in general with the series, starting with you, Alana.
Sure. I think I've told this many times. But Persona 3 wasn't the first Persona game I beat, but it was actually the first Persona game I tried out. Like, my brother's friend brought a copy over one day and was like, hey, you'll like this. And I tried it and I was like, this is weird and hard because I apparently didn't have any like brain cells in like 2007. But then like 10 years later, like Persona 5 teased me into the series with the like flashy visuals and its trailer, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try again. So then I played 4, really liked it, and then like maybe 5 or 6 months later I jumped into Persona 3 FES and loved it, carried on with the series from there basically. I have only beaten FES. I have played a tiny bit of Persona 3 Portable, but not to completion. Like, I'd say probably only a couple of hours. So FES is my only exposure to it, and I've only played through it once, including the answer, or most of the answer. So I was excited for Reload to drop at the beginning of the year, because it was and was my favorite Persona game, even after 2 at that point. Um, they've done a lot of really good things with the remake, so I'm super happy with, but it was a really interesting and fun exercise in like revisiting something that I thought I really loved, and maybe found out that I didn't love it as much, but I still really enjoyed it. So yeah, there's like, I'd say Persona 4 was my first Persona game I beat. I think Persona 3 is the game that made me a Persona fan, so it was a fun revisiting experience.
Awesome. Yeah. And Aleks, what about you?
So my first Persona experience was actually Persona 3 Portable because when I was a teenager, I had a cracked PSP, so I could just upload that for free. Price not an issue. So I was always interested in the series, but I wasn't really allowed to buy mature games as a kid. So this was a good loophole for me because I just had the PSP in my room and I could pull it out and download whatever I wanted onto it. So that was a really eye-opening experience in terms of kind of how the series introduced like socialization slash dating sim dynamics into like its more dungeon crawly elements. I thought that was really cool. It's like pretty much nothing I ever played. But I really couldn't get super into the visual novel style format of Portable, where you're basically controlling a cursor rather than like like an embodied avatar. Um, didn't really like that too much, so I ended up dropping it about halfway through, or maybe even less way through. And I was determined to play Persona 3 FES at some point instead. I think I ended up playing 4 in the meantime and didn't really click with me. I just compared to 3, the character dynamics and overall vibe of the game just didn't do it as much for me. But when I finally got into FES when I had a PS3, I absolutely loved it. Obviously, it's a game that has its issues and its frustrations for sure. But I really that game really left a positive impression on me. And going back to Persona 3 through Reload earlier this year when I reviewed it, for the site was an awesome experience, and I honestly loved the game more than ever. I thought what they did with the remake was pretty positive on in every single way, and even if it changed some things that I appreciated about the original game, like I just like this is the definitive version. I had a great time with it.
Awesome. Yeah. And I thought that did a great job of selling it in your review as well. And justifying the very high score that you gave it. And I think that, yeah, I thought it was an excellent review. For me, I have never played Persona 3. I have plenty of experience with the series at this point. I guess actually, interestingly, my first one was Persona 5. And I just really enjoyed that. And then I went back and played Persona 4. And I liked that as well. Maybe not as much as 5. And then I played the first two, Persona 2, both Innocent Sin and then Eternal Punishment for the podcast. And I just absolutely adore the storytelling in those games. I think it's
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
on another level. In terms of pure storytelling, I think it's, one of my favorite games. It is not one of my favorite games to play, so I like it. And it's interesting to see that it goes from, Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment to this. Um, and I've played Reload, probably the most recently of the three of us, I think. And I really enjoyed a lot of it, but I also in a lot of ways felt like it was trying to sort of play on some of the thematic ideas of 2 and that they were doing with 2, but it didn't have some of the polish in the storytelling with things like social links, which I'll talk about later, with that 4 and 5 I thought had. So I have some issues with the game, but overall, excellent experience. It's super fun, especially to dungeon crawl around. Um, and just such a polished experience from a UI and design perspective, which
Mhm.
I think is impressive, given that it sort of mostly maintains, I think, to a large degree what the original was. So I think that's pretty cool. So speaking of, before we get into the changes, and I kind of want to talk about the changes here because we've already had an episode on Persona 3, which I believe Alana was on. Was it a game journal? 2 episodes?
No, it was one. It was like
Okay.
well, yeah, we kind of decided that like it was too long to do like a whole game journal on.
That makes
And
sense.
so we just condensed it down. Same, we did the same for Persona 4 as well. So yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, I hadn't ever listened to it because I hadn't played it, so I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember. But to kind of back up for a second and talk about sort of the history of Persona 3 that we've sort of been talking about. So Persona 3 originally releases over here, I say over here in the States, in 2007, and then pretty shortly after you get the souped up Fez version in 2008, which adds the answer, or what do we call it? It's the answer is what we're calling it now, right?
The answer is
The
what it's called, yeah.
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 But yeah, it's got a different name now,
Episode,
but
I guess, is what they're going to call it
Episode
for the
Igus, I
yeah,
DLCs.
think.
episode I
Okay.
guess, yeah, which is
Okay.
yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a bit.
It's
Okay.
not as good of a title, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, the answer is
they've
pretty compelling.
right, and they even give the lead in the ending of Persona 3 Reload. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Huh.
don't know why
Okay.
they felt they had to change that.
Yeah, there's a character who's like, "Oh, you'll find the answer," or maybe this is the answer, and you're like, "Ha! They said the title. There you go."
It really was the answer all along. And and then in 2010 we get P3P, Persona 3 Portable, which adds in a female main character option. It also sort of lowers the game in a lot of ways in terms of like graphical fidelity, but it also gives you control over all your characters, which you don't have in Fez or the original Persona 3.
Yeah, that's true. And you also get different social links too. There's a bunch that aren't in Reload, and you have social links with all the boys as well. So yeah,
Yeah, you
and
can
obviously
romance the boys.
you can romance the boys, including Ken. Can we
Yeah,
just like
that
say?
is a weird one.
That's a
Oh
choice.
god.
I know
Yeah.
they're not planning to include the female protagonist in Reload, which is really unfortunate. But
Mhm.
on one hand, it's like at least there's no romance of Ken anymore.
That's pretty rough. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it was released again on modern consoles in 2023, which, I think is cool because like when that happened, I was like, oh, I guess we're never really going to get from the ground up remake of it. I wasn't really expecting it when it was announced. Even though I knew it, like there had been rumblings of it, but then when it got released on modern consoles. So I was like, oh, I guess that's probably just what they were talking about. And then we got it, which is very cool. So, as both of you have covered, there are a lot of changes for Persona 3 previous versions to this one. And I think that's probably what most people who are listening are most interested to hear about. Sort of your thoughts on those things and your thoughts on some of the changes. So, I guess I'll start by just asking, what are some changes that you guys really liked in this version? That you thought were really strong, that added a lot to the presentation or to, the game in general.
I mean, I guess the elephant in the room is just the UI. Like
Mhm.
they gave it the royal treatment. It now looks like Persona 5 Royal, which is a game that part of the reason why it's so great is because it looks absolutely amazing with its like just red aesthetic UI just kind of popping off the screen, just like all these like bright colors and sharp corners of the text boxes and things like that. Like it just looks so cool, so stylish, so interesting. And just applying that to Persona 3 while maintaining its kind of more like cold blue aesthetic just looks like really great. And it doesn't feel like it's just kind of riding on the coattails of Persona 5 either. It's like really leaning into it with its own kind of identity. Just like the menu screen with just the protagonist kind of hanging upside down and kind of like that underwater kind of look just is beautiful. I love opening up the menu in this game. So that's one that definitely stands out as positive.
Yeah, I agree. I think subtle is not the word, but it's the only thing I'm coming up with. Like, I feel like Persona 5's UI is beautiful and in your face, and that's like the whole idea of it. But like you said, Alex, like the underwater style of it, I think is really resonant with a lot of Persona 3's themes of like, you've got a lot of characters who, more than any of the other modern Persona games, and I use that term loosely because, 2006 is not really super modern, right? But like it really hammers down the themes of like death and drowning and like problems and
Hmm.
things like that. So I think it marries everything together really well, and like it's not like super pervasive, but it makes like a lot of it makes the whole experience like a lot more coherent. The only thing I'm a tiny bit sad about is like in FES, and I don't remember if this is the case in Persona 3 Portable, is that your selection menu in combat, because in the reload they like map them to buttons, but it used to be like a
Oh, the
revolver,
revolver,
yeah,
yeah.
that you would like like scroll through like the bullets basically of the evoker to pick your options. But I'll take ease because I do like button commands a little bit more, but I'm still a tiny bit sad about that.
So it was basically just like a wheel that you spun. Is that right?
But yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, basically, but in
Okay.
the style of like loading a gun up, basically, if
Okay.
that makes
Yeah,
sense.
like it
Yeah.
basically had like the chamber of a revolver like in the corner, and then the top like hole would just be like your command, and then like as you
Okay.
press left and right, it would
That's
just
cool.
rotate around. It's really cool, but yeah, I guess they wanted to just give it like Persona 5's like ease of control, which I mean, like for a turn-based game, like you can't get much better controls than this in Persona 5.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, for any I guess we can kind of talk about the combat now since we're on it. For any criticisms I might have of this game, which we can get to later, combat certainly is not one of them. I feel like it is just so satisfying to kind of figure out the weaknesses, and it's just challenging enough early on. Later on, I sort of built my characters in a way where I was just like obliterating the enemies like immediately. But it's just like so stylish and fun. And I get a feeling that like the theurgy system, which is something they've added in for this one,
Mhm.
where you sort of get like this limit break like ability that you can sort of cycle between. You have different options for each character. Probably makes the game a little bit easier. And also just how easy it is to navigate, the ability to sprint through Tartarus,
Hmm.
which I think is more visual now, right? Unless I'm mistaken on that. Um,
Mhm.
so the combat here, I think, is really a joy. And every time I got into a fight, I was never upset about it, unless I got like, ambushed, and then I was just upset with myself. So, yeah,
True.
I think the combat in this game is excellent.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's super breezy. It feels great. Like the pace at which like your Theurgy bar like fills up, like just feels like perfect. You never feel like the game is like giving you too much power, but you're definitely like a little overpowered, like just on the normal difficulty. The game is really not too challenging. The original like Persona 3 slash FES was way more difficult,
Hmm.
which led to frustrations because you also like if you died, you couldn't just restart the battle the way you can here either. Like you're back to the beginning of your night in Tartarus. Sorry. S-
Unfortunately, that is not always true. If you die to a regular enemy, you get popped back to the start of Tartarus,
and
which I may know from experience.
yeah,
oh, I didn't realize that.
and a monad door boss as well. A monad passage boss you can like go straight back into, but a monad door boss, no.
Okay, I mean that's a fair touch, I think, just to like amp up the tension and difficulty a little bit. I mean, like that should probably be communicated in some way though, because I certainly didn't know that.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I only learned from experience.
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, like like you said, Zach, like the battles in this game were just like a joy to participate in and breeze through and look at all the cool visuals as you're doing cool things. And like on one hand, like a lot of the tension of exploring Tartarus is lost from the older game, I think, and I think there's thematic value to how frightening Tartarus kind of was in the original, but in terms of just like being a playable, fun experience, like Reload has it figured out for sure.
And there was a tiredness mechanic originally as well, right? How did that
Mm.
work?
I'm a bit rusty on it, but basically, like, you can only spend so much time in Tartarus before, like, your party starts getting tired. So, like, rotating people around is actually, like, way more important.
Hmm.
And there were also, like, some days where, like, other characters couldn't go because they were too tired. So, and there was no way of recovering it apart from, like, just benching them or, like, not going to Tartarus the next day or whatever. So, I mean, like, and in the original Persona, or FES at least, like, you'd be hard pressed to do like a block of Tartarus in a day, whereas in Reload it was basically how I did the whole game.
Yeah.
So you would need to like work around that. So it made like keeping your party the same level easier in some ways, but also then you've got like the clock, haven't you? That in Reload that helps with that. So yeah, it was annoying, but again, it's like part of that like because I feel like Persona 3 like balances between like Persona 2 style, but also SMT style. So it's got like that friction going on in
Hmm.
at least the PS2 version has. And especially because you can't control characters in that game like at all. So it loses that a little bit as well. And yeah, I'd agree with both of you in that like I think the combat is super breezy. I love it. It's really rhythmical, so I'm just happy to like take it in and just like breeze through the game basically. I did put it on hard, however, because I was like, I want some more, like, I want more out of this. And that
Hmm.
really did push me a little bit. Like, it's still not like super challenging, I'd say. But there were a few more instances where like I can get one shot potentially from like a stronger enemy or a boss, especially if I've got a weakness to it. So that helped a little bit, but like I wouldn't put that on anyone who's like got a time limit or anything on playing it because you can die and lose like 20 minutes of progress and it's like, oh, well, okay. Well, I guess I'll not play this for like 24 hours because I'm annoyed at it.
Yeah, that's the only reason basically I didn't
Hmm.
put it up to hard is because I was just like trying to crush it in time for the review, and
Yeah.
this is
Right.
like
Oof. Yeah.
already a
It
100-hour
is,
game.
yep, not a short game.
But I was kind of curious because I did dip into hard for just like a couple battles just to see what it was like, and I was wondering, how do you find hard compared to the original game's difficulty?
Easier, honestly. Like,
Still quite a bit easier.
maybe, yeah. I mean, like, I remember like certain Tartarus bosses, like I don't remember what block it was on in the original, but like there was the table that did like the lightning damage that was like super hard in
Right.
P3 FES. I don't even remember in Reload. It was just like a bump in the road, basically. I was like, yeah, okay. But maybe slightly more on par. I think some of the later bosses might have been a little bit more challenging or tankier. But yeah, like I still probably died more in original FES than I did in Reload hard mode.
And did you feel like like you said you were basically just going to Tartarus like once a month, right? Just getting it all in one go, so that didn't really change with the higher difficulty?
Actually, I probably did go in more than once, and it was mostly for resources. So like I would definitely burn through a lot more healing items. So I would just go in, try and get the devil card, which allows you to get like 2 items from those like statues, and then I would just run through floors blind, trying to get like either the twilight shards, which are also new in reload, or healing items or
Mhm.
beads or things like that. And so I would probably go in twice a month on hard mode, but I'm also like probably not playing optimally. So it really is just a game of like resource management, even on normal mode. I think it's all about just balancing what you've got.
Yeah, making sure you're getting those SP recovery sodas every week from the vending
Oh
machines.
Yep.
yes,
Even
yep,
though it's only like 5 SP, I was still like,
Yeah,
"Yep,
it
I'm
adds
getting
up.
that."
right,
Yep.
absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting because I was just wondering about that because I guess the one thing that I kind of miss from the tiredness mechanic. I mean, like not even like the tiredness mechanic did kind of suck, but at least it made you think a little bit more about when you're going into Tartarus, just being kind of more strategic about that. I
Yeah.
think that did add a little bit to the overall flow of the game, but again, like I said, this is just a more enjoyable version despite that.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I agree with that. I'd usually plan it around like when are people gonna go missing in Tartarus?
Yep.
Like I'll
Yeah,
just go in
always in the
after that.
last 3 days, somebody always
Yep.
goes missing.
Pretty much,
Elizabeth gave
yeah.
me a call. I was like, "It's time to go in." And I know there were some other changes even outside of Tartarus, because I know in combat there's changes. The monad doors, which you guys mentioned, I believe are new as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like a twist on like an old thing from Persona 3 FES, so yeah.
Okay. But I know there are changes even outside of that. What are your thoughts on some of the other adjustments that have been made, like with the fast travel mechanics or things like that, in sort of the social nature of this game?
So I want to like talk about linked episodes because like while we didn't get like the male social links for Persona 3 Reload, we do get linked episodes, which are like moments where like the male cast get like a little bit more character development and stuff like that. And you'll usually get rewards for them, like items, or eventually like items where you can fuse like the ultimate persona at the end of an Arcana tree. I think these did a really, really good job of fleshing out most of the male cast, whereas I think like in FES, I always remember like, oh, Yukari or Mitsuru or Aigis or I mean Akahiko as well, but this one actually gives you like more time with Shinji, who in FES, like you don't really get any time with him. You get like 2 months, no social links, and unless you use him in combat, then that's kind of it really. That's all you get aside from him being around Aki sometimes.
Who
But
wouldn't use him in combat? He's
in
so
in
good.
in FES, I feel like he's got I think every party member's got a huge buff in Reload, to be honest, apart from maybe I guess and maybe Akihiko. But everybody else is like way more useful.
Hmm.
Okay, fair enough.
So Shinji was definitely like, and I put Shinji in FES just because I was like, oh, he's cool. I want to be him, and then they killed him, and I was really sad about it. But yeah, like the linked episodes I think are really good. Some of them are super like tight windows. Like Jinpei's in particular because his is tied to Chihiro, is that her name? Yeah, Chihiro's
Yeah.
the redhead girl. Yeah. That's tied to like her storyline. But they're really, really well written, I think. I think they're actually better written than most of the social links, which I'm sure we'll touch on.
Yeah, I mean, most likely just because they were more recently written.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe the writers just have a sharper pen, or it's different writers. I don't know.
Hmm.
But I mean, I agree. Like the adding those in, and just like all the kind of casual hangouts with all the party members around the dorm, just doing things like watching things together, watching boxing with Akihiko, or watching a nature documentary with Koromaru, uh
Yeah.
doing some cooking, making coffee with Ken as he tries to pretend like he likes coffee. All those were just super charming and added a lot to an already really, really excellent cast.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, so I thought those were great. I also thought that it was great that you didn't have to pander to them through like the social link system. I
Oh
actually
god.
really like that you get to kind of just pick whatever dialogue option you feel like in those interactions, and there's no consequences for it. You just kind of get to hang out with these characters. I think the social link system can be really interesting and adds a lot of value to the game, but having these non-gamified hangouts were a breath of fresh air, honestly.
Yeah. And while we're talking about social links, let's go ahead and talk about them. So anybody who's listening should know that this is the first Persona game that added in these social links, and it becomes sort of like this life sim along with the dungeon crawling element, and it blends the two in really interesting ways. And then obviously that is what the series becomes. It's very different from Persona 1 or 2 on that front. And so, you have all, like 24 different arcana, I think. I don't know. Is that number right, Alana?
23, I think 23 or 20. Yes, 24, 0 to 23, isn't it? So yeah.
It's like I know she'll know the answer to this question. And so in between sort of dungeon crawling, you can go hang out with different people. You can rank up the social links as you're having conversations with these people. And my impression is that the social links are all the same from the original, right?
Uh,
Yeah. mm,
I feel like some of them were changed,
s-
particularly I think Yuko's is a bit different.
Yuko's is different, yeah, especially because Yuko and Zach's favorite one, the art club dude.
Oh, he's the
Those
worst.
two, those two are different because those social links were tied to. So in Persona 3 FES, you could choose what sports club you joined and what creative club you could join. So you'd still get the same person out of those like clubs, or different, I think in some cases it would depend. But yeah, you would have now reloads like forces you to do like track team or art club. Whereas in like original, I think I did photography club and maybe swimming. I might be wrong on that. It could be basketball, one of the two. And that would change like some of the dialogue depending on what sport you did. But
Okay.
yeah, those two are slightly different. I think on the whole, the selection is the same as Persona 3 FES,
Yeah.
but yeah, like I think there are like minor differences in some of them, particularly those two.
Yeah,
Okay.
and also obviously it's fully voice acted now where there was like no
Yes.
voice acting before. And honestly, like after like I played 3, 4, and 5, I probably before I played Reload, I would say that 3 had the worst social links, and maybe it still does. But I think the voice acting added a lot, a lot, a
Hmm.
lot to these hangouts. I think that a lot of the ones that just didn't click with me the first times I tried to play the game were just not super interesting. Like I couldn't really get into the character. I couldn't really sympathize with the character. Meanwhile, here with the voice acting, I found it much easier to do so for some reason. I guess it was just well picked voice actors for the most part, and there are still exceptions for sure. Like the Moon Arcana is still a disaster.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Oof.
awful.
Yeah,
I'd
It's
like
so rough.
I'd wipe that from my memory somehow.
I think I just fast forwarded through like half of that one eventually. I was like, this is I like I'm not interested in this at all.
It just doesn't know where it wants to go. It's like slightly fat phobic, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm in a cult. Bye. And then it's the end of the social link, and I'm like, wait a minute. And like at the end of the game, you can build on that because it is literally the end of the world, and that's what his cult is about. They want the end of the world to come. So yeah, Nozomi is definitely a not a great one. Um, I'm trying to think. There's another one I don't really like that much. Oh, magician. Your classmate who's like trying to date the teacher. I'm like,
Yeah,
dude. And then he
pretty
gives you
weird.
like, and then he gives you a collar at the end of it. I'm like, I want to know like what you're into, like teachers, and then like giving me like fetish collars. I was like,
Yeah, I actually don't think I want to know.
yeah, yeah, it's not great, but like again, they're all really well voice acted, so at least like I find Nozomi like irritating because his voice actor does like such a good job. And the same with oh my god, I cannot remember his Kenji. I think Kenji's his name for the
Kenji
Kenji's
is
the
right.
magician.
magician.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he's like super annoying because of just like how like he sounds like so sure of himself and he believes
Exactly.
everything that comes out of his mouth. And I'm just like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I wish I could help you, but I'm just gonna like cheer you on instead in the background because that's what the social links are like.
I always hated Kenji as a social link.
Mm-hmm.
I think I actually grew to appreciate it more. Like not him as a person. I still think he's really annoying, but I think it's a great first social link because
Mm.
I think he's deliberately grading. Like I think that the game's not trying to present him as a super likable and
Yeah.
sympathetic dude.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so like your dialogue options with him are either like viciously like shutting him down or just kind of like going along with his like deluded thinking.
That's true,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's like the game is almost like it's the perfect way to show you how the social link system works because it's like testing you whether you'll be like this supportive friend who just kind of like goes along with what he says and then you that's how you get the most points in his social link whereas
Mhm.
like putting him down like doesn't progress the social link. So it's
Yeah,
like
that's
it's
true.
telling you like are you going to be a friend to this stupid idiot or and like get his points or are you going to like just like speak out against him against his like clearly stupid ideas and like fail to progress the friendship. So from a design perspective, I think Kenji's actually great, but
Yeah,
as a character, he sucks.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I have like one overall, because I think that the social links in this game in general are pretty flat. I think that they're like fine mostly, but like they have a very particular rhythm to them that I think, especially in five, is definitely like a lot. I just think they're just a lot stronger in general in five. But I actually don't know what the game is trying to do thematically by making me agree with him or agree with the cop. He's not a cop; he's a student council president, but he's a cop who is trying to figure out who's smoking in the bathroom, and then like viciously questions everyone around
Oh
him.
yeah.
He sucks too.
At least he has like a moment where he like suddenly realizes that the school is just gonna over punish him and he like really realizes like he's been
Mhm.
overdoing it too. So
Yeah.
I do give him that, but yeah, I totally agree. Like for the first like 6 or 7, I'm like, my dude, I'm
Well,
like,
at
you
the
know how
end,
many
he's
people I
like,
knew who smoked? Yeah, like
at the end, he's like, I would never have figured out the fallacy of my ways if it wasn't for you. And I'm like, I just agreed with everything you said. So
pretty much.
I'm not really sure how that works. So yeah, I think the social links are kind of weird in this game because like it wants you to agree with people that I don't agree with, but if you want to get through them, you have to. And I feel like in later games they didn't play it quite that way, and I just thought like the rhythm of them was all kind of similar. Like the Sun one, which could be really good. It's the guy who's dying. It just feels like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm just going to read you 3 more lines for my story now. Do you like it? Yes. Cool. I'm sad.
I
And
actually thought that one had some interesting options because it felt like if you tried to pretend that you like understand his experience,
Mhm.
it would get like negative reactions, which makes perfect sense because you're not dying. So why would you understand his experience? So just like having you like be just like kind of a listener to somebody who's going through like a very unique experience, even though he can be kind of annoying in some ways too. I actually think that does work for me at least.
that's an interesting way of putting it that I had never thought of before. Yeah. Mm, yeah, maybe I like a little more now. Okay,
Yeah,
fair
like
enough.
I feel like what this game's trying to do with this social links is just try to like ask you to put yourself in the mindset of the character, even if they're unlikable, which I think
Mhm.
is an interesting move. And it's kind of why I appreciated the social links more this time around. And that maybe I'm not sure that it's my least favorite cast of social links because the social links in 4 and 5 felt a little more like pandery in terms of like the main character's influence, whereas these characters just kind of like grow on their own just by you kind of just expressing like empathy with them is how I started reading it. At least maybe that's overreading it, but I definitely started to appreciate these a little bit more.
No, I mean I like that reading of it. It certainly, at least it makes it a little more thematically coherent to me, you know.
Mhm.
And the game is thoughtful enough that I don't think it would have been thematically incoherent, because I think the social links in this game are the concept of social links in this game is more important than it is in 4 and 5.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because like that idea of like what do you have to live for in the face of death, because we're all gonna die one day, so who cares, why does it matter, which certainly is one of the questions this game is plumbing, right? And I think
Mhm.
that um the ways that we are making connections with these other people, even people who are sometimes repugnant. Although I will say my favorite social link in this entire game is easily with the most repugnant character, and that is
The
Tanaka.
devil, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I just he's so scummy, and it was so fun just to listen to him just like indulge in his scumminess. That like
Yeah.
and I liked that it was different from any of the rest of the social links on that front. And he's just like the actual worst person. And he just like leans so hard into it that I thought it was just like delightfully over the top and fun. But yeah, I mean, I think that the concept of social links is really important in this game, which I don't think is true in later games.
Yeah.
Um, so
I think
I
one of
like that
the
part of it.
yeah. I think one of the other ways that this game in particular leverages social links in a really interesting way is just like the last month of the game. Once you kind of know
Yeah.
what the fate of the world is, suddenly it like changes the way like you perceive the social links. Like both from like a gameplay standpoint in terms of like you know you only have like a finite time unless you've been like min-maxing perfectly, you won't have enough time to complete all the social links. So suddenly it puts an extra onus of decision making on you, the player, of being like, how do I want to, who do I want to spend these remaining days with in terms of like these social links? But also just like listening to these characters talk about the future when you know that there is maybe going to be no future just really recontextualizes like everything that they're talking about in a really fascinating way. So in terms of that, that's another way that like I think this game just excels with incorporating its social links into the overall story. Is just that final month.
Yeah, and I think like Igus's social link in particular becoming available only during that month, and it's like a real distillation of like what everything that the game is trying to do narratively. Like she's trying to like repurpose her life after she's like, she's supposedly this weapon that's supposed to destroy all the shadows, but she couldn't destroy Nyx twice. And so she's trying to like figure out like what her purpose is. And she's already had like a couple of moments of humanity, and she like helps a kitten, and she helps this old lady, and she
Mm,
chastises like another student who's like not helping out his grandmother or something like that. And it's like during these last moments, it's like she knows the world could end, but she's trying to do all this stuff for other people, and she's a robot. And it's like it's like a really on the nose, but also like really beautiful social link. And like, yeah, I think that you make a really good point, Alex. It's like, I'm thinking about like, gosh, what was another like an abhorrent social link? Lots of them. I mean, Miyamoto, the track guy, who you like literally tell to run on an inflamed knee, but like it takes him a lot of stuff and a lot of that pain to like realize that actually he can push himself in different ways, but also like it's he wanted to make his little brother or his cousin happy. So that was like his driving factor. It wasn't about like him doing it for himself. He was doing it for somebody else. And
mhm,
a lot of those social links also are about that. About like making things matter for other people. And ultimately, like even though you're like telling little girl Maiko, who is like one of the other really good social links, I think, to run away from home and like tell her that her parents hate her. It's like really it's stuff that she wants to hear, which is, in a vacuum and generally I think is not great. To tell like a 10
You
year
don't
old
think that's
kid.
good?
I know. I don't think it's good. Like, yeah, tell it like a 10-year-old, like your parents hate you. They're divorcing because of you. It's like, oh, okay. But then also like there yeah, it's like it's a weird like blend of like I don't know, I can't like word it properly, but it's like trying to marry these ideas of like, it's the end of the world, you want to give everyone what they want, but also like you want to listen to people, give them the ideal answers for their world, and like everything that matters in the moment is them, like
Mhm.
basically, and what's happening to them. So yeah, I think you make a very good point, especially if you've got like some of these left in the last month. And you're just like, oh god, like the world's gonna end, and I'm not gonna like go on a date with somebody or do this or do that. Like really small things to
If I were to miss
you.
out on my date with Mitsuru, I would have been very sad.
Well, you didn't. She can't marry you anyway because you're dead, and she's also engaged.
Is she engaged? I feel like she's like not really
She's
engaged.
not, but she will be married off. That's just like the whole thing.
Yeah.
Sadly.
And I'm really enjoying this thematic conversation. But before we move on to sort of talking about the plot at large, which I want to do, is there any other social links that either of you really enjoyed that we haven't talked about yet?
I think we actually touched on, yeah, all the ones I was most interested in talking about.
There's one that I really like, which I think is like even without like digging into like the weeds, is like a really positive encapsulation of the themes of the game, and that's the Hierophant, which is the old couple who own the bookstore. And I think that's like a really lovely story of like you have this like couple and the man perhaps has like Alzheimer's or some like memory degenerative disease, and he keeps forgetting things. And it goes down to the fact that like you find out that their son has died in a car crash, and he was a teacher at Gekukan High School. And so they planted this persimmon tree at the school, and then you just have to go through. I think it's a really easy social link to progress because, like, it's pretty easy to empathize with someone. It's not easy to empathize with someone whose child's died, but you know what I mean. Like, it's like, how do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, and they're just like such lovely, lovely people too.
They are like he gives you like snacks like for the first like 4 or 5 social links every time you go there, and it's like he becomes like a father figure essentially. But like they go through this like whole roller coaster of like we need to protect the persimmon tree because the school wants to like cut it down and build a new like area for the school. But then by the end of it, even though like tons and tons of people have like signed this petition, they realize, you know what's like more important is that our son, even though he's dead, he would want these kids to have a better education. So we should let this building be built for them. Like, even if that tree, which stands for the memory of him, is taken down, like that building will not replace that memory, but it will like take that spot and have a memory of their child in a different way. And I think it's a really beautiful social link.
Oh, I
Uh,
agree.
that's really well put. And I feel like that is one that more than most of them benefited from the voice acting. I felt
Hmm.
like I remember like in my original playthrough just thinking that some of the dialogue felt a little flat, but the voice actors they got for this one really brought a lot of sympathy to those characters, I think. And I guess one more that I can shout out is the tower, the monk that is drinking in the
Oh,
club.
that one's so good.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
he's another really good one, and like you can just feel like so much like there's so much unsaid in that social link, especially like early on. Like you can really like get a sense of like the pain, the coping, and then just like the happiness when he finds out like he's going to be able to get back together with his family. And it's just a great arc to witness.
Yeah, it's funny, like some of the options that you can pick for other social links are either like black and white is not the right way to put it, but like some of them are just like you being a complete arse or you being like pandering to what they want. And this one is like you don't really ever have the option to admonish him for like his problems or anything like that. There might be one or two options, but like the game never wants you to put him down in any way. And I think that's really interesting, especially because like I think the first time I met him in FES, I was a bit like wary because I was like, why is the monk drinking alcohol? Like, so you have like this preconceived notion of like what monks are,
Hmm.
but then you find out things about him and you're just like, there's no point. Do you ever feel like annoyed at him? Like, he's just like any other human being who like expresses frustration and anger and sadness with like his situation in a way that is very relatable and very much like you don't want to put him down. And he also is trying to show kindness in a way that's like not conventional, but you recognize it, and he's trying really hard. And then he also like talks about his job as well, doesn't he? Like where he has to
Mhm.
like do like a sermon for like 20 people, or he's like, oh, I have to do like 10 sermons for people tomorrow. I don't think I can do that. And it's like thinking about like the weight of that on top of like having something as simple as like a hangover, or like the depression of not like potentially losing your marriage and your family is like, and you think like monks, again, I could be generalizing here, but like monks would probably not be able to show that level of emotion from their side. It's like, how do you compartmentalize that? And it's like, this is the only time he can like let that out, which is
For
not
sure.
healthy, but the game never ever admonishes him for that. It's not like, oh, you're an alcoholic. It's just like, let him do it. Yes, it's funny sometimes. Yes, he's a bit of an asshole sometimes, but also it's it allows him the space to do that and be this like be a flawed human being, which pretty much everybody in this game is to some degree, and the game very rarely, only in a few cases I think, really like admonishes that idea of being flawed.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. That I agree that his like trying to pick the ideal dialogue option for him felt especially tough compared to other social links. And
Mm.
I think I remember like I don't know if like he was drunk in this particular one, but like he's drunk at some of the times that you visit him, and it kind of like impacts like his mood and like what he's like looking to hear from you. And I think there was one time where like I tried kind of pandering to his ideas the way that I would to like a lot of the other social links, and he like kind of called me out for it. And I thought that was a really clever moment for sure. So yeah, definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, I really enjoyed his as well. And there's one more that I wanted to like, and then I didn't, and that is Maya's the hermit one,
Oh right.
which is kind of a cool concept to begin with. Like you obviously know that the person you're talking to is your composition teacher, and then I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird, but like kind of interesting to think about that concept and like sort of what those interactions would be like. Um, and like her like sort of leet speak, which is very accurate I think to 2007,
For
is a little
sure.
annoying, but then she's like, oh, I have this crush on a boy in my class. I'm like, oh no, why'd you have to do this, social link? You didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
It was going well, and I think at some point you find out that she's married, and like I don't know, man, like that particular social link I thought had some promise, and then it veers off into the weird, and I was sad about that.
Yeah, especially the end where it just like you see her like coming to terms with it like in person and kind of like having a breakdown, and it's kind of like played a bit for laughs.
Yeah.
Not the best. But I agree that the premise on its own is actually really good and has a lot of promise, but just like the execution lacked some of the empathy that it gave to other NPCs.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that the social link system, you can feel them sort of feeling their way through it, and um, I appreciate that about it, and I like that it's thematically resonant. And I think this game pulls a lot of the threads of what's thematically resonant about Persona 2, at least, and it's a more coherent piece than something like 4 or 5. Whereas 5, I think, just like goes, as much as I enjoy that game, just goes way off the rails in some of its later chapters. And the social links don't feel like an essential part of the rebellion element of it. Whereas here, it feels like it absolutely is. Um, which, speaking of, I guess we should talk about the. We've talked a lot about the themes of the game, but we haven't really talked about the actual narrative itself very much yet, which is okay because we've covered it sort of at length in the previous episode. But I do want to kind of get into some of the thematic elements and also just sort of the plot of Persona 3, which for me at least took a little while to get going. As in took a very long time to get going. Um, but the general concept is that I think that I can't remember what his canon name is.
Makoto? Makoto
Yeah.
Makoto.
Yuki. Yeah.
Makoto. Come to this dorm, and it turns out that there's this thing called the dark hour where like almost everybody is like in a coffin for an hour, and beasts attack during that time. We're trying to figure out what's happening, and you are along with the other people in this dorm, a persona user, which means that you can summon sort of like an alternate version of yourself that is powerful and fight against them. And then from there, you have the friends you make, and you pull more people in, like Ken and some other people as well. And sort of eventually you discover that what you're doing to try to stop this from happening, which is every full moon, I believe it is.
Mhm.
You go out and you kill this really powerful monster in shadow, and it turns out this is all sort of a man-made thing by Matsuru's family, who lives in your dorm as well, and is also one of the persona users. And eventually you discover that you're being manipulated into sort of creating the end of the world by the chairman of the school, who you believed was on your side but wasn't. um, and people die along the way. I'm going through this very quickly. But there's a lot that sort of happens in the closing hours, and I think that in the closing hours is when I really started to resonate with this game, because I thought the plot itself was like pretty solid, but once it really starts leaning into the themes of sort of hopelessness and what you do in the face of hopelessness, I thought that was really strong. So, what are your general thoughts on the plot, on the story itself, and also the themes of the game? We can kind of go all over the place here, and maybe some favorite moments or some moments that really struck you in this narrative this time around.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that it is a slow burn in terms of the story. Like, not too much is progressing, like in terms of like plot points in the first couple months. But at the same time, like it's kind of just allowing you to uh really get uh like immerse yourself in kind of like the everyday, the school life, and trying to balance that as you're trying to like get to know Tartarus, and you're slowly like building up your party. Like you don't even have like Akihiko and Mitsuru, even though they're in the dorm from the beginning, which I think is a great touch. I think it's like really nice that you basically have four major party members like in the dorm from like the get-go, in Yukari, Junpei, who are actually in your party, and then Mitsuru, Akihiko, who are kind of just supporting because they're vets, they've been around. I think just having that kind of more fleshed out party dynamic from the start adds a lot, um, in terms of like just building character from like the very beginning. It's really cool how Akihiko and Mitsuru like early on are kind of these like admirable figures who just seem like so much more mature and cool headed, um, in terms of like knowing what the dark hour's like, trying to like help you and the other new recruits kind of get uh acquainted with it, and how to deal with it. I think that really creates that like found family feeling that the game is trying to develop, with just like the dorm also as this cool little hub setting you go back to every night. I think that's all great. um, I also think like the characters are really like the strongest point of this game and its story, I think. And I think Junpei and Yukari as the mandatory, it seems, persona boy girl that you start the game with, are the best out of all those pairings.
Mhm.
Better than the ones in 4 and 5 for sure. I love their voice acting. I love their characterizations. I love their petty banter. I think they're just such believable, interesting, like flawed but compassionate characters that really go through like a fulfilling arc by the end of the game, and that just like really give you like a couple buddies to get to know from the get go. I really love this game's cast.
Yeah, the characters are like the best in the whole, not in the whole series, but like definitely in like 4 and 5 in comparison. And Yukari and Junpei are like a really great example of like that double act essentially that you have from the beginning of the game, because like they're both not like the best people in the world again. Like
Hmm.
in, I think it's toned down a bit in Reload, but like Junpei is, and it's made more apparent later on. Junpei is like super jealous of you. Like he wants to be better than you in every single way, but he recognizes that he can't be, so he gets frustrated numerous times. Like I think the time where you go to the Love Hotel, like where you do a lot of the work, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess that you solved everything," kind of thing. He's like really mad about that, and that's what like leads him onto Chihiro and this idea of like him being a hero for somebody else. But like he recognizes there are times where he like loses it at your character, and then like within like a couple of days he's like, I'm sorry dude, like I didn't mean that. And he has those like moments of reflection, which his linked episode also allows for. And then you've got Yukari, who's like, she's supposed to be like this like super popular girl, but she's like a little antagonistic to Junpei in particular. But like she is, and initially with your character, she's kind of like wary, but she doesn't really want to show you around and stuff like that. But she does anyway, so she like becomes like this like sister character, and you bond over the fact that like you've both like your character's lost both his parents, and she lost her dad to an accident, which her dad actually ends up being like a very pivotal character towards the end of the game because he was one of the ones working on the project which the Kirijo group were working on, which caused the shadows to be created. So she has this like drama or dichotomy with like Mitsuru, because of that relationship with her father with the Kirijo group, but also like she's gone through like a lot of family drama and stuff. Like she's like from, I want to say like lower, she's like definitely middle class, whereas Mitsuru is like definitely like upper echelons of like the class system. And the two of them have these like this conflict because like Mitsuru is so like impersonal and cold and very much like the leader in like every sense of the word, apart from Makoto being the leader. She just wants that distance, but she like starts to break down that shell on Mitsuru, and she doesn't do it in the best way. Like she slaps her at one point, or she gets really angry at you and runs away, and she's very emotional. But again, like the game is never like faulting her for that. It like allows her to have that space. In general, I think like something you said, Alex, which I really like, is like this is like a really well fleshed out cast, and I think because they put them all together so early on, or like, at least like the main four, it allows you to like see that friction between the cast. Like they're all like put together by circumstance, but it's not like I'm thinking about like Persona 4 and like the murders and saving people where they just kind of are like buddy buddy immediately, or
Mm-hmm.
like Persona 5 where it's just like, hey, we need to rebel against society and adults, so we're just going to be like best friends. Whereas this game is like, Fuka, who is the navigator, she like causes problems because she does something for Yukari and looks into the Kirijo group's history in the school, and that potentially creates conflict. Well, it does create conflict because Yukari like presents that information, and then there's like a fight, and it's like, what are you fighting for? And Akihiko then has this moment, and blah blah blah. I could go on about like all the different frictions all these characters have. The most obvious being like Shinji killed Ken's mum, albeit accidentally, but there's like that whole situation going along. But yeah, it takes like a long time for the cast to gel together, but not in a way that feels inorganic. It feels like really natural to see these like different pieces of this very misshapen jigsaw like fit together eventually, and they use like those struggles and those differences, and it really works. Like it really creates this like very cohesive group that by like October or November or December of the game, you're like, yeah, I believe these people want to do something and they want to do it together. Like it's not like they've just been like stuck together and just do it because, oh yay, fun. It's like they understand, and also they love each other eventually as like friends and found family. So I'm a big fan of these characters too.
Yeah, and like it feels like found family, like not in a forced way, the way it can feel like in 4 and 5, where it feels very much like the main character is just the nexus of the group. All dynamics between characters are kind of filtered through the main character. It's like these characters have
Mm,
like relationships with each other. They grow not only through their interactions with the main character, but through interactions just they have together. There's like more complex histories, especially with Akihiko, Mitsuru, Aragaki, and Ken. Like all have like a history that really factors into the way their characters act and then develop and learn. So that just ends up making them feel like so like such more like believable characters that like have their own agency. They're not like totally indebted to the main character in like every way. They're like really like just a family in the sense that they have conflicts with each other. They work through to resolve those conflicts. They grow as individuals and it like feeds into the whole group dynamic. It's something that not many games do that well and that this game just really nails.
Yeah. I think that the two of you said it better than I could. I think that, and I agree. Like as much as I do think that this game is a bit of a slow starter, it pays off, um,
Mhm.
and it pays off in a big way with the connections that you see with these different people. And I think Junpei in particular, it is a character who you see real growth with. I don't think that you see a ton of growth in some of the other characters, but I think Junpei
Mhm.
almost feels like a secondary main character in a lot of ways, and almost sort of like a foil for the protagonist in a way that I think is really strong. And I've heard that his characterization is improved in this game. Is that true?
I think he's one of the stronger ones anyway in the original, just because of like the
Yeah.
plot. But he is certainly like improved. Like he's slightly less annoying in this version, I think. But like, he's like brashness and like him being like not liking the protagonist is not like he's not like immediately like, oh, I'm gonna be better than you. That like there's like a more, oh, social expectations. So I probably shouldn't be like a complete arse to this person, but also like I want to be better than them basically. So I really appreciate his character growth throughout this game, and I think like the linked episodes do a really good job of like ironing that out and like letting him again like voice those concerns and having that space to breathe. So yeah, I think if I'm gonna pick on like a character who I think is the most improved, I think it's Ken. Honestly, I think Ken is. I mean, I don't know whether it's just because they allow him to be a little bit more silly in this version because it's like, oh, I love coffee, but wait, Phoenix Featherman Ranger is on the
Yeah.
TV kind of thing. And I kind of love those moments where it's like every kid, right? We all know like kids, or even us as kids, like we've been like, oh, I'm an adult now. I did this thing. I drank coffee. I made breakfast kind of thing. And then you see like something you really like and you're like, oh my goodness. But Ken has like been through a lot generally. Like as I said, like his mum died, and as a result of like a Shinji's like persona going berserk, basically, um, and so he has had to deal with like a lot of emotion, and I really like the way that the game deals with it, even if sometimes like some of the characters like deal with it in heavy-handed ways. I think it is the way that some people would react to it, like some people just being like, oh, let's just let this 10-year-old like run around and like not like not not find him, basically not give him. It's not that they're not giving him like a support system, it's that he's like, oh, if he wants to grow up he needs to like deal with it himself, whereas like you've got like the other characters who are like, oh, but we need to go find him because he's like 10 or 12 years old, like he's just a kid. So it like really balances that well. But again, he's another character I think the linked episodes like add tons to. Like you you have like these ones where you just go out for dinner with him and he's like complimenting the chef and he's like, oh, I wonder what they put in this ramen. And then like the next one is like, oh, I have a hamster called Hamburger. I'm like, hold on a minute. I'm like, you really are 12, aren't you? You're trying really hard and you feel that sympathy for him. I think just trying to like navigate the world as like this kid who's had to do everything independently but is still a kid. You can never like get rid of that from him at that moment, and even though he tries, you see him like struggling with that like push and pull of that. So I think he's like a super much improved character, I think, from the original.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That in the original, like he like his personality quirk is that he's a kid who is trying really hard to be mature, and like part of that is due to like really serious trauma, but like most of the interactions you get with him in the original is just him trying to be really mature, and it kind of being like sometimes a little bit off-putting, but it is does add a lot that with these linked episodes, that you just really get to see him being a kid, and you get to also see him like trying to be mature but it falling apart kind of in his face.
Yeah, I remember
um
like the with the oh, I don't know what to describe them as, but like when you can hang out with him in the dorm, I think you mentioned it earlier. Like you can either drink coffee with him, or like you can watch like foreign cinema about a detective on TV. And like, if that's like not like someone really trying hard to be like an adult, then I mean, I don't know what else is. But then he has like these moments where he like criticizes the detective. He's like, oh, why is he saying that? That just sounds like really corny. And then when the detective like does the thing and says the line, he's like, oh no, that was so cool. I want to say that kind of thing. It's like, we've all had those moments.
Yeah, for sure. That's just some good writing there. But I mean I agree that like Junpei is probably my favorite character in the game. And part of that is because I think he's just like a very thematically significant character in that he is just very much like just a teenager. Like he's like pretty immature. His heart is in the right place. He has like dreams of being like a baseball player, but he just like ended up like ditching that at some point, and now he's kind of just like aimless. I think at one point when he's visiting Chihiro in the hospital, he like talks about like how he doesn't actually have a reason to live because nothing about his life is pointing towards like a clear future. And this all that goes on with this like idea that a lot of his like insecurities and his kind of lashing out at the protagonist came from the fact that the dark hour gave him this power and purpose, which is like another thing that like the villain Takaya kind of says and like makes like a big point out of. But for Junpei, the dark hour really is everything. It's what has given his life direction. It's what's given him these friends because he doesn't really seem to have friends outside of this group either. So he just ends up being like this really sympathetic and real teenager that I think just adds a lot to the game and yeah, it works perfectly as a foil.
Yeah, I think that will be an interesting one to see play out in the answer. And if I've only played a little bit of like Persona 4 Arena, which is like a sequel to Persona 4, but also to Persona 3, where some of the characters come back as like 20-year-olds. Junpei is actually the most mature character out of all of those returning characters in many cases, and in the answer, he is basically like the voice of reason from what I remember. So, like with
Mm.
the improved characterization, I think it will be really interesting to see like how much clearer that is, but also like how differently they write that or how they emphasize
Huh.
that more.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully it's just also more fun to play this time.
Oh god, yeah, it's such a like I'm excited to play it on PS5 now because yeah, like I played like half of the answer on PS2 and I was like, I think I hate this and it will detract from my love of Persona 3. And it didn't probably didn't help because like in FES, I didn't totally love Aegis. Like I kind of found that she was like I hate using the word overrated, but like I knew she was like the most popular character or one of them, and I was like I don't really understand this. But with Reload, I'm older now, obviously, but she probably is one of my favorite characters at this point, and
Mhm.
that social link is like just is really why I think. And I love how like stupid and goofy she is as well. Like I love that. I think the phone that you have is totally new to Persona 3 Reload, so you had to like remember where all your social links were and you couldn't like fast travel to them and stuff. But like when you start like texting her, she like sends you that message with like all the cat emojis, and she was just like really artistically describes like the cat emoji, and she's just like all of this like culminates in like this cute picture, which is a cat. And I'm just like, you're so cute. I'm like, I love her. But yeah, she's a great character. Although it takes her a while to like gel in as well. Like she's very much the outsider and very much like
Mm.
she just kind of appears. She like appears on the beach when you're like trying to do like the weird like beach dating episode, which is way less weird in this version because they cut the transphobic joke and replaced it
Yes.
with a conspiracy theory joke, which is way funnier. Um but
Low bar,
like,
but yeah.
it is a really low bar, isn't it? But they like I'm glad they went like the complete other direction,
Yeah, me
basically. They
too.
went from like the right end to the left end, so I'm happy about that. But yeah, like she just joins and it's kind of just like, oh yeah, we just have a robot living in the dorm now. That's normal. I'm like, what is normal about that? Like, I get it. There's like lots of weird things going on, but
I mean, there's also
rob
a dog, so
But
Yeah, we've gone an hour and over an hour, and Alana hasn't talked about Koromaru yet, and I'm not sure what's wrong with you.
Koromaru is. How did they make Koromaru like better? Like you have like I say a low bar, but like improved dog is like the lowest, easiest. Like, you don't even need to do that. Like just put Koromaru as he was, and he would still be like amazing. But no, they added like his like linked episodes again, which show him
Oh, they're
like
very sweet.
oh they're so good and like showing how like he's affected the community and like his loyalty to his owner and just like he's just a really good boy. He's just like so perfect. And I love that he's voiced by a human. I think like lots of people criticize that. But I think it just makes him slightly more endearing because you're just like, there's this silly dog barking. Like, he just sounds so stupid. And you just like copy him, and it's like, yeah, you talk to me, Koromaru. That's great. I don't do this with my cat at all, but you know.
Yeah, no, you
Yeah.
definitely don't.
But yeah, Koromaru is great. And also, like, he wasn't one of the best characters in the original FES in battle. Like, I used him still, but like, not being able to control a character whose basic premise is like, use death spells, it's not ideal. But they add like light and dark magic to reload, and so not just death spells. And also, like, Koromaru is like a crit machine. Like, he just like boosts everyone's crit stats and then gets debilitate, and it's like, oh, you're never leaving now, are you?
Damn,
But
I kind of wish I used Koromaru more. He was
Oh,
kind of I didn't really sub him in much.
Mitsuru's ability to boost crit was absurd. So
yeah,
I was happy with her in my party.
yeah,
Also,
Mitsuru's
because Mitsuru is the best character. Let's be honest. We can all agree.
gameplay wise, Mitsuru is definitely the most improved. As I've made many jokes about, like her computer, like Marin carrying the life out of everything
Oh
in
god, she was
FES, and
unusable.
she was unusable, and now she is like definitely one of the best characters. Yukari's like you can heal everybody for 1 SP is stupid broken. Like Junpei gets like auto crits as well.
Yep.
Ken's like
Junpei's
second
so strong late game.
yeah,
Yep.
and like yeah, Ken's like second theurgy is like a party wide HP, SP, and revive spell. It's like every single character is like even slightly more useful than they were in the original. But yeah, Koromaru is amazing. And you get to
Yeah,
watch
I
nature
think
documentaries with him. So yeah.
I think Koromaru and Ken's kits did get the most
Hmm.
reworking, and yeah, it seems much better. Like Ken was in my party most the time in the late game. I think my main party was Yukari, Junpei, and Ken for the end game.
Yeah, I mean Junpei's physical, but I use like the original four and had a lot of success with them too. I think that any setup you have, like you can make the kit fit together
Yeah.
in a way that makes sense because everybody has something that really distinguishes them as being
Hmm.
excellent.
Which feels like pretty different, I think, from Persona 4 and 5. I feel like there are like best characters in those games. Like
Hmm.
again, I did not play Persona 5 optimally because I haven't played Royal. So I had Haru in my party and she's like definitely like
Ooh,
not the
no.
best. But yeah, anyway, let's leave that out. But like her, Yusuke, and I think I use Makoto as well, which is definitely not the most optimal way to play that game. Um
Makoto's good.
Makoto is good, yes. And Yusuke is good too. Like technically, depending on how you use him, he's like slightly better physical than Ryuji. But yeah, like I feel like with Persona 3, like it encourages like that optimization and that playstyle more, especially when you turn like the main character into like the physical crit machine, because that's what I did.
Yeah,
Oh
me
yeah.
And
too.
yeah, it's like that's like the win all strategy in every Persona game. I feel like Yoshitsune and Persona 4 is like the strat to use, and you don't quite have that, but Siegfried and oh god, there's another one that's really similar. There's another like Japanese Edo inspired persona that you get that's like level 70 or 80 that's really really good.
Siegfried was my MVP for sure
Yeah,
Yeah.
same.
Yeah,
as
Siegfried
a
was mine for a
persona.
lot.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, if we're talking about the meta, we're probably getting close to the end of the episode at this point, and you guys have had amazing things to say. So I want to sort of ask sort of our final thoughts. I'm not sure what games in the series you've played besides. I mean, if you've played 3, 4, and 5, Alex, but I'm not sure about 2.
I've played
But
Innocent Sin, still not Eternal Punishment.
oh, Innocent Sin is so freaking good. It's so good. But it's sort of where you think it stacks up in the series, sort of your final thoughts on it. Does it hold up to what you originally, how you originally felt about it? And sort of like where you think it stacks up in the series at large.
It's my favorite game in the series at this point. With this remake. Before I maybe would have said either Royal or Innocent Sin, maybe even Innocent Sin over P5 Royal. But once I played this, like it brought back like everything I loved about this game, built on top of it with a lot of the extra hanging out, with especially with the main cast, who, like I mentioned, I just absolutely love. And at the same time, it ironed out a lot of the things that were kind of dated or frustrating or annoying about the original. And I just think like now this is just not only like the best place to start in the series. It's like it feels like the quintessential Persona game in a lot of ways. It feels like, yeah, the best place to start. It feels really excellently paced, uh, compared to 4 and 5. I'd say even it doesn't seem to drag as much, at least not for me. I mean, I guess like maybe that's a little, my idea there might be a little bit skewed because I did play the game in like 5 hour sittings trying to beat it for review. So I don't know if I can
That'll
speak
do it.
completely honestly about pacing, but I felt like it was just really well paced. It went down really easily, and it just had these really beautiful, rewarding moments, and character developments that make it just, yeah, one of my favorite RPGs, honestly.
I came into this episode being like, oh, I think I like not like I might like it less. Like originally it was probably my favorite Persona game. I think I'd tie it with Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment. Now I can't really like split those two games up. I think they're like two sides of a coin, or like one side two sides of a mirror or something like that. But like talking to you two about it like makes me like realize like some of the like friction that is still there, and some of the things that like I don't love about it still like add up to like a whole that feels like very very complete. And there is still some kind of messiness. Like it feels like the transition between like old Persona and SMT and new
Mhm.
Persona, and I like this like dichotomy of like ideas that seem to work together to create this like very, I feel like Persona 5 like hits you around the head with its themes like very often. Like we are like, we don't like adults and adults don't like us, but like, and I think Persona 3 is very obvious about its themes of like, life in the face of death and hope in the face of hopelessness and what your purpose is. And I think it is pretty obvious with that. I mean, like, one of the ultimate personas is literally like the Messiah, and your main character dies at the end of the game because he has to, like, sacrificially. Um, and there's a lot of like themes with some of the personas which aren't as deep as like Persona 2 Innocent Sins. Like, I think some of the Greek myth that they tie into the narrative. I saw someone like commenting once, so they were like, "Why Greek?" And I was like, Greeks love death, right? Like, like there's like a lot of death in myth in general, but like Greek, and there's like some Egyptian and some Roman, but Greek is like the kind of culmination, or like everything like ties into Greek myth very well. But death in particular is like a very resonant theme within Greek mythology. But yeah, I think like talking with you two about it like keeps it up like near the top to me at this point, because, and especially with Reload, like making it like way more accessible to people, way easier to play, but it doesn't like lose a lot of that, like doesn't lose its identity and becoming more stylish, even if I think it's like a tiny bit too easy. And I think like some of the clumsiness is still there, like some of the social links aren't as engaging, but they do work with the narrative. It's like the way I don't like certain parts of Persona 2, right? Persona 2 plays like but like that like ending like 5 hours is so worth it that I don't really care. And I think we haven't really talked about the ending of Persona 3, but like I do think the ending of Persona 3 is very good. Like
I agree.
it's very, very, very good. So yeah, I still really love Persona 3. I would easily recommend it first beyond anything. I have not played Royal yet, so maybe that might change things. I highly doubt it though, because I don't think a single character in Persona 5 even matches up to like the weakest character in Persona 3, and I don't even know who that is at this point. Like, it's just such a strong cast, and that really is what makes that game to me.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be the outlier here and say that I think amongst the Persona games that I've played, which is almost all of them, and this is damning it, or this it's praising it with anyway. I, I think it's probably my least favorite of the Persona games I've played, but I really like all the Persona games I've played, and I really like this game too. I think that I would probably still put Persona 2 Innocent Sin in particular over it. I like the social links. I think that the social links dominate these games so much that I just enjoy the variety and the kinds of storytelling that I got in 4 and especially 5. I really like the dungeon crawling in this game, but then if I'm going to compare it to something else, like Persona 5's dungeon crawling obviously blows it out of the water, right? Um, so I do think it is the most thematically consistent of the modern Persona games, but it still doesn't quite have it took so long to get going for me. I thought the social links were kind of repetitive at times, and felt like, you know, yeah, just kind of going through the motions at times. I'm just going to agree with whatever you say. Yeah. But I totally take what both of you have said, and it's made me appreciate this game more than I did coming in, and I enjoyed it. But I think that I enjoy it even more now. So maybe a couple years down the line, or I don't know, when I want to sink 75 hours into a game again, I should play it again, and see if my thoughts have changed. But I think a lot of what you guys had to say improved my opinion of the game, which was already very high. So I appreciate that.
Also, our RIP Aragaki. We didn't touch too much
Oh my
on
gosh.
when he was in the game, but like that whole segment of him being in the game and the way, um, like that all like his whole arc of like being able to like do those extra little hangouts with him and like having the option whether to hand in his student resignation or to try to like talk him back into uh going to school, and like that just being like the way that whole thing works with like what he's going through and his relationship with Mitsuru and Akihiko is just like peak character development in an
Mhm.
RPG, I think. Just the way that those two characters are torn down from like their pedestal and kind of made more human through all of that is incredible. And I don't know why I'm bringing this up now, but I just like that
Well,
is
I'm
just
glad you
like one of the
did.
most emotionally impactful
Oh,
Yeah.
like moments I've ever experienced in a game.
oh yeah. Like the minute like Koromaru howls, I'm like in floods of tears, and then like 20 minutes later, it's like, oh, I'm back to school. And then like Akihiko has that moment at the shrine in the school, and then I'm crying again because of the like relationship between those two characters and like
Yeah.
everything they've been through. And then I feel like an idiot because, yeah, of course, Castor and Pollux are like their two personas, and obviously Pollux is going to die because, or Castor is going to die, one of the two, I can't remember which one, because he's human and one isn't, right? And then the other one is going to help the other one evolve. So, duh, why didn't I see it? But also, R.I.P. Shinji, my MVP, and also like just an incredibly well written character. I think this
Yes.
game does like death really well, honestly, character death. And I was really scared they were going to take it out of this, and I'm glad they did not.
Thought they were going to pull a Final Fantasy IV, which is the last game that Alex and I podcasted about.
Yeah, that's true. I was worried. They did not
But
though.
But yeah, it's also like with that, like you get the text messages from him like the way you would like any other character to just do those like casual hangouts. But if you're a player just coming in and not knowing what Shinji's fate is, and you're just like, oh, like I'll just like hang out with somebody else for now, like I'll get to him later, and then he ends up dying like that. I really want to hear the story of a player who puts off
Mm,
hanging out with him for too long and has to deal with that
yeah.
afterwards, because that's another
That would
really clever
it
design
would be.
choice.
Yeah,
Right, yeah,
for
because
sure.
like Shinji's all about like he lives with regret, and then he decides he's not going to, and then he dies, and then he dies not taking that regret with him. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
if you've never hung out with him, it's like I regret this. But then Akihiko's all like, no, I've got to keep moving forward, kind of thing. And it's like, oh god, like yeah, that's really clever. Actually, I hadn't really put that much thought into it until now, but I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I do. One thing I didn't think about at all is that idea of the timeliness of it, and the way that this game pushes you up against a clock in a way that matters and not
Mm,
that is sort of artificial like it is in some of the other games. So I think
yeah.
that's a really clever thought, and it's one of the things that I appreciate more about this game now. So thank you, Alex.
Hmm.
Yeah, always happy to try to tell everybody how fucking awesome this game is.
Well, you convinced me this time, even if you didn't with Lost Odyssey. So no one
One
was going to
day.
convince me about that game. Well, if we are talking about Lost Odyssey, it's definitely time to end the episode. Thank goodness. I brought it up. It's my fault. So, again, thank both of you so much for joining me today. I really loved hearing both of your thoughts, and especially from sort of a veteran perspective, but also how thoughtful both of you were about this game. I really appreciate it. So, let's talk about what's coming up. So next week we have an RPG Obsessions episode with a special guest. I won't give away who that is. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to or not, if Solici's already done so, because we're recording this a little ahead of time. And then we have 2 episodes on Omori, RPG, which deals with heavy themes, heavy ideas, just like this one does. And next month, I'm not sure if it's been announced yet, but I will be announcing it now if we haven't yet. But next month in June, we will be playing Grandia 2, 2 episodes on Grandia 2, which I'm very excited about. I'll be hosting those episodes, and we'll be playing through that game with, I guess maybe Ryudo's edginess would maybe fit into Persona 3, sort of, maybe.
He definitely has like a thematic arc very similar,
Yeah, he
especially with
does.
his brother. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're also probably, I was told to say probably, going to have an Ayuden Chronicle 100 Heroes spoiler cast, which I'm excited to chat with other people about the game that I maybe found a little disappointing. So if you would like to email us, you can email us retro@rpgfan.com. You can also reach us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, which I think is called X now. I don't know.
It's still Twitter. Don't worry. It's never X to me.
We also stream on Twitch almost every day. Our YouTube is getting more active. You can find us on our Discord as well. There's lots of ways to reach out to us. You can also shop for RPG fan merch in 2 different places. One is TeePublic, where we sell all kinds of merchandise like t-shirts, sweaters, stickers, things like that. I've got my RPG fan t-shirt on right now, and you can also buy the Hyperplay RPG fans review card book, which is an amazing 300-page book of a bunch of review cards from previous games that we've reviewed. It's awesome. If you like old school magazines, it's the thing to pick out. We also have 2 other podcasts. Random Encounter, which is every 2 weeks, usually hosted by John O'Logan, usually about current events and current games. And then Rhythm Encounter, usually hosted by Mike Salvato, about RPG music. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I think YouTube nowadays, not Google Play, because I don't think that exists anymore. We'd love feedback, so feel free to reach out to us that way. And let's find out how we can reach out to the rest of the panelists, starting with you, Alex.
Yeah, you could just email me at alexfraniczek@gmail.com.
And Alana.
I have a Blue Sky, which is
Woohoo!
semi-used. I know, right? Alana.Hagues on there, or if you really want to, you can come check me out on NintendoLife.com, where I usually am in the background nowadays, but like I'm usually beaving around somewhere. There'll be something on there with my name on it, maybe.
Perfect. And you can reach me via email, zachw@rpgfan.com. I check it pretty regularly. And you can also find me on Discord as Zach W. And that's it for today. And again, thanks both of you so much for joining me. And thank you, listeners. Good night and good luck.